Thank you for coming, Eric.
Thanks, Michael, and congratulations.
Thank you.
You want me to just start?
I was told.
Okay, no problem.
I'm sorry. Actually, I have some things on my mind this morning, and
okay. Yeah, you've been a little busy.
The person on stage next to me is Eric Schmidt. He's the CEO of Google. Anyone who hasn't heard of him, please raise your hand.
No, that's fine.
And okay, I have no idea what he's going to say, but every time he's spoken, I found it fascinating. I hope you talk about mobile and social and that one other thing that we emailed about. If that could just, those three things would be good.
Okay, well, congratulations again, Michael.
The stage is yours.
Thank you. And thank you guys for having me. I know this is a very important conference. What I wanted to talk about a little bit was what I think is going to happen next. It seems to me that we're at yet another one of those very interesting points in technology where something interesting is about to happen. And if you think about it, this audience, what you're all doing and so forth, represents another transition in the way people will use information and use computers to make amazing things happen. I'm trying to think about how to express this, and I think one term I would suggest for you is what we're really doing is building an augmented version of humanity. That fundamentally what we're doing is we're basically getting computers to help us do the things that we're not very good at, and humans are already helping computers do the things they're not very good at. So in theory, the combination of the two can produce some really new experiences. So if you think about it, the longer term goal is actually a little different from what we normally talk about. It's really about having people be happier. That in fact, that the use of computers, the use of the information, the use of all the things that we're all building can make us all have better, more productive, more fun, more entertaining lives. And that, to me, is the opportunity that is really before us. And there are lots and lots and lots of data points that suggest this. 40% of internet users around the world spend 13 hours or more around online. It's interesting that the 2009 word of the year, according to the New Oxford Dictionary, was unfriend, right? That we're all now using this technology in this very fundamental way. And what's happening is that there are these three trends that are accelerating, and that the sum of them is driving this enormous phenomena that we see here today and that we've seen around the world. Every one of you has a smartphone. It turns out it's the defining and iconic device of our time. And what's interesting about smartphones is that within 2 years, smartphones will surpass PC sales. We're already seeing a very, very strong and accelerating growth there. And mobile is a larger market in a lot of ways. I like to think of it as your strategy should be mobile first. Indeed, most of the companies that are previewing here, the 25 or so over the next 2 days, are fundamentally mobile-centric in some very fundamental way. And in fact, mobile web adoption, which is one way of measuring this, is occurring 8 times faster than the equivalent point with the personal computer 15 years ago. And so it gives you a sense of the scale that we're operating. It's why everybody's so tired. It's why everybody's so frazzled. It's because it's such a larger market. And we're in a situation where we have pervasive connectivity. It's no longer the case that your music player can avoid being connected to a Wi-Fi network. A music player by itself, which has stored music on it, is not nearly as interesting as a music player that has stored music and has the ability to interact with the music that's available to it real time and around it. And we take this for granted, but it's worth saying that in the next year, in the United States and in some other countries, the rollout of LTE, as it's called, will occur across many cities from a number of vendors. Now, LTE, which stands for long-term evolution, is a 50 megabit spec, and indeed it's been tested at that, and the expected average performance will be between 8 to 10 megabits. Wow. Now, what are you going to do with 8 to 10 megabits? Well, I'm sure not only will we soak it up, but we'll come up with other ideas, because that's what drives the innovation cycle. And I remember thinking, if I could just get to 1 megabit, that it would all be so different. In the case of other countries, South Korea, for example, has just set a goal of having 1 gigabit per second to each and every inhabitant by the year 2015. Finland established a national law that said that it was a right of every Finn to have 100 megabits by the year 2013. So other countries are even farther ahead of us in this. This has a lot of, again, implications because it means that you're always connected and you're always online. One of the estimates is that there are 35 billion devices and so forth. And by the way, they're in cars and sensors and medical devices and so forth and so on, and everywhere you could possibly imagine. So the combination of pervasive connectivity in these mobile devices is backed up by cloud computing. Many of you are working in cloud computing. We've worked on it as an industry for a very long time. What does it really mean to have cloud computing? I'll give you a simple example. We can now demonstrate, and are in the process of getting ready to ship, products which allow you to speak in English and have it come out on the other end of the phone in another language, for example, German. Now, how does that actually work? Does your phone do all that work? And your phone is sort of so incredibly powerful that it knows how to go from 1 to 100 other languages? Of course not. All the phone is doing is it's taking your voice, digitizing it, and sending it through the network to a server. That server is doing a speech-to-text translation, which is relatively well done these days. We can then statistically translate the text to text from one language to another, and then we go through a voice synthesizer, this again on the server, and do that, and come back and give it to the other phone and speak in the other language. Now, to me, this is the stuff of science fiction. I mean, oh my God, that we can actually do this. And the fact that this can be done in a half a second, a quarter a second, which we think is too long, by the way, by thousands of computers in a server room far, far away, is immaterial to the person who's just trying to communicate with the person who doesn't speak their own language. So to me, cloud computing can be understood as the magic behind what the phones can actually do. That cloud computing, and phones here means tablets and so forth and so on. And for me, cloud computing will fundamentally be expressed not in the way that we used to talk about it, which has to do with web services and so forth, but rather in these new services that make your life just work, and work in a really interesting way. There are lots and lots of other examples of what cloud computing can do, but one way to think about it is you've got a mobile device and you've got a supercomputer, and the two are connected by this pervasive network, and that's what all of us are building. Now, this concept of making humans better is not a new concept. It's one that's been around for a long time. In 1990 at Comdex, Bill Gates talked about information at your fingertips, all the information that someone might be interested in, including information they can't even get today. And what happened? Why did it take 20 years to get there? Well, we had to build all the infrastructure. We had to actually build the servers, build the cloud computing, build the standards, do all of the issues around collaborative filtering, all of the underlying AI research that is necessary to do this. So 20 years later, that vision is very much a reality. And if you think about it, it's not just the hearing and the speaking that I was talking about. There's also understanding. And we can now get, with modern AI techniques, to things which look awfully a lot like real understanding. And of course, they really aren't, and computers are not the same thing as people, and so forth and so on. So what is driving Google to try to do this? Why is this important? This vision, I think, is now well accepted and exciting, and so forth and so on. Well, one way to think about it is we want to give you your time back. That in an information-centric world, you have two problems. You have this overload of information, and you have too much to do. So in one sense, giving it to you quicker, right, speed matters. Never underestimate the importance of speed and fast. Really does pay back in terms of your life. It also means that you can use the services faster, you can learn more things, and so forth and so on. But there's another and rather paradoxical point that although we talk about the speed of computers and Moore's law and so forth in these networks, there's another explosion, which is the explosion of information. And that this explosion of information is so profoundly large, it's so much larger than anybody ever expected, that you need some help navigating it. And ultimately, search engines and the other knowledge engines that everybody is building will morph over time into things which help you figure out what you should be consuming, what information you should care about right now. So in our case, with search, we do more than 2 billion searches a day. Think about the scale of that. And of course, we care about the time for this. We did, it's interesting, there's a quote from Linus Pauling, satisfaction of one's curiosity is one of the greatest sources of happiness in life. And indeed, much of Google seems to be about that. And we make lots and lots of improvements of this. The most recent one was Google Instant, which people know about. And you sit there and you go, well, why is Google Instant so important? Why do we spend so much money and time on it? Because it shaves a couple seconds off of the whole query cycle. And a couple seconds off that many different people really makes a huge difference in terms of people productivity. We have one of the largest databases of information in the world, which we've engineered and which is very, very difficult technologically in order to house all of that information and ready for more. So where do we go next with search? Well, you've got personal contacts, personal emails, personal network of people, and your relationships to them. And with your permission, and I need to say that about 500 times, with your permission, we can actually search and index that information and make all of these answers so much better. The next step after that is obviously autonomous search. This is searches that are occurring while you're not even doing searching. For me, you know, I like history. Here I am in San Francisco. As I walk down the streets, I want my mobile device, in this case, to tell me what happened, where it's going, so forth and so on. Tell me things that I don't know. Tell me things that I would be interested in. Think of it as a serendipity engine. And think of it as a new way of thinking about traditional text search, where you don't even have to type. We're also trying to understand what you mean when you search. You know, when you say, what's the weather like? What you really are asking is, well, should I wear a raincoat or should I water the plants? And we can, with improvements in algorithms, more information with your permission and so forth, we can get closer to be able to answering the question that you really asked. And we're also thinking about other forms of specialized searches and so forth, as everybody knows. What's interesting about mobile is that the mobile opportunity is so large, it's breathtaking. Our mobile search traffic grew 50% in the first half of 2010. Our mobile business doubled over the last year. Android, I think everybody here knows how successful that is. The numbers are staggering, more than 200,000 phones per day. Devices, I guess, technically, but mostly phones. Now powering more than 60 devices from 21 OEM partners across 59 carriers in 49 countries, with deals happening every day. So the momentum is only accelerating. It's interesting that the search traffic from Android phones more than tripled in the first half of 2010. Chrome, our browser, is a good example of what it's going to take to build the kind of architecture and platforms that I'm talking about. If you want to build an open web, which Google is committed to, and I should say right up front that Google's core strategy is openness. Other companies, notably Apple, have a core strategy of closedness. Ours is fundamentally an open one, an open web, an open internet. It's sort of how we actually drive everything. You're going to need a powerful browser. Chrome now has more than 70 million users, and it's getting a lot faster. Remember that speed thing? Latest release is 4 times faster than the first release 2 years ago. And so if you think about a powerful browser that's more of a platform, which is what Chrome is, secure, scalable, fast, and with a lot of speed, Chrome allows you to run applications within the browser that you could do autonomously. So autonomous action within the browser that enables this whole new platform that I'm talking about. And of course, there's lots to do about monetizing content. As everybody here knows, it's just as important to have the money side of the business and the monetization side in particular, as well as the technological side. We have a lot of good news to report there. 24 hours of video uploaded every minute into YouTube, just think about it. More than 2 billion views per day of YouTube. Again, think of all the time being wasted, I suspect. 160 million mobile views per day, more than double in the last year. The numbers here at scale are really something. And the business is doing well. More than 2 billion monetized views per week in YouTube. And the number of advertisers and number of monetized views up more than 50% in the last year. Similarly, the display business, many of you partner using display revenue and so forth, is also taking off. We have more than 300 million visitors a day in our display network. Three-quarter of the world's internet users come through it in one way or the other. And the DoubleClick platforms serve more than 45 billion ads per day. So the sum of those not only give you a platform opportunity around Chrome and Android and those technologies, as well as this notion of core information search, but they also give you a way to monetize. So again, returning, let's say right up front, that it's a big bet on open. So let me turn and comment on a couple of things and then take your questions. It seems to me, first and foremost, that the internet is one of the most disruptive technologies in history. The Schumpeter quote, of course, people have heard perhaps, capitalism inevitably leads to a perennial gale of creative destruction. You are the creative destruction. Right? This is it. This is ground zero right here, if you will. And what's happened is that the internet has replaced the economics of scarcity with the economics of ubiquity. And that businesses that rely on controlling content and limiting content are at risk to businesses that understand that content should be broadly available in all forms and monetized in new ways, new forms of distribution, et cetera. And these businesses are both exciting and terrifying. They're exciting because of the scale. You can reach 1 billion people literally overnight in a new way. They're terrifying because it has all to do with information. And information is stuff people care a lot about. And so all of a sudden, when you're in that business, you find yourself confronted with all sorts of criticism, regulation, investigation, and so forth and so on. And from my perspective, and I think from our perspective at Google, these debates are healthy because many of the questions are really unresolved. The debates over privacy, the debates over encryption, these are fundamental questions that society has to face because of the disruptive nature of the internet and the new kind of power that it gives to end users. We fundamentally are giving people an enormous amount of technological power in their hands in this vision. And that shapes and changes the power relationship between citizens and governments, citizens and private companies, citizens and each other, the law, and so forth and so on. So if you put all this together and you think about what does this really mean, you can think of this as another golden era. And in this case, I think it's a golden era of breakthroughs. Breakthroughs like we've seen in the last couple of years based on this platform. One way to think about this is think about how can computer science and science in general help with these breakthroughs. Global warming, terrorism, financial transparency, these are all fundamentally information problems. So all of us in one way or another can help there. So imagine a future involving all of us that looks roughly like this. And by the way, this is a near future. It's a future where you don't forget anything because the computer sort of knows things and remembers things. And computers will clearly be good at doing the things that we're no good at, making lists, remembering things, keeping memories of what we do. They're not very good with things like judgment. And although there are predictions in that area, I think it's unlikely that they're going to do a very good job for a pretty long time. But one thing they're very, very good at is dealing with billions of things and scanning them and data mining them and all those kinds of things. And people will develop new ways of doing that. In this new future, you're never lost, right? You don't get lost anymore. It used to be fun to get lost. Now you look at your Google Maps or however you navigate, and you have exact images of where you are. And what's interesting is that we can, and with new technology, we will know your position down to the foot or even to the inch over time. So all of a sudden, there's a lot of implications for how exploration occurs and our sense of how small the world has really become. Your car should drive itself. It's amazing to me that we let humans drive cars. Computers should drive cars. It's obvious, right? If you think about it, it's a bug that cars were invented before computers, right, in that sense. And all of a sudden, it'll be much, much safer when we let the computers do the things that they're good at and the humans can talk or eat or whatever they want to do in the car. You get the idea. What's interesting about the Earth is people who love the Earth can love it more. You can learn much more about our planet because you can visualize it, you can see it. There are very, very large numbers of people who are now using Google Earth and other mapping platforms to study the impact of the only world that we've all ever really known. You can really have all the world's information at your fingertips in any language with universal translation. We're basically at the point where we can do a 100 by 100 matrix of translation. That has a lot of implications, again, for global understanding, both the good and the bad. And the fact that we can now do it dynamically and in real time is a huge breakthrough for understanding how people and the world will evolve. You also can know now what to pay attention to right now, right? Amidst the explosion of real-time information, with your permission, again, we can help you understand what you should focus on next. Because we have the tools, we have the understanding, we know what you care about, and we know what's going on. And we can even suggest the things that you might be interested in based on various algorithms involving serendipity and so forth and so on. You're never lonely. You're fundamentally never lonely because your friends are always online. And if you're awake, you're probably online. And if your children are awake, they're certainly online. That's a huge shift, even in the last 10 years. There's always somebody to speak with, text to, talk to, and so forth. You're never bored. You're really never bored. Instead of wasting time watching television, you can waste time watching the internet, right? Whenever you're sitting there and you're bored, there's so many choices now. This is another change. It's a change that's occurred in the last 10 or 15 years, and one which is not going to come back. Games, movies, videos, and we can suggest again what you watch or what you not. You're never out of ideas. We can suggest where do you go next, what to do, who to read, who to meet. Imagine a world's calendar of events and things that you would like. Now, this is a future. What is particularly interesting about this future is that this is a future for the average person, not just the elite. Historically, information markets focused on the elites. It was the elites who had access to information. They ran around. They were all very pompous in the way that elites are. But what's neatest about this all is that because of technology and because of information access, this is a future for 1 billion people now, 2 billion in a few, and certainly in our lifetimes, 5 out of the 6 billion or 6 out of the 7 billion of people that will be alive today. So not only are you playing for a space that's important, you're playing for something which really touches almost everyone. So this, in my view, and this is, I think, a shared goal with all of us, is a future that's committed to doing good. It's a future that gives people time to do more of the things that they matter: thoughts, ideas, intuition, solutions, things that they want to do. It's a future that's the sort of stuff of poetry, if you will. There's a quote, which I'll finish with, from William Gibson in the New York Times 2 weeks ago. "Google is made of us, a sort of coral reef of human minds and their products." I think this opportunity is right before us. I want to thank TechCrunch, Michael, and the whole team for letting me come by and talk about this. And thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Okay. Thank you. So there are mics.
Thank you very much.
There are mics in back, and there are people with mics going around. So I encourage you to either line up or raise your hand. And let me start off with one question. I mean,
Sure.
some people are claiming that Silicon Valley doesn't solve hard problems, yet everything you just described seems to counter that. But it raises a bigger question about the role of search in the way that we discover information. Up till now, it seems like the search engine has been the central place you start, and then you go and you find information. Yet increasingly, we're starting to see new technologies, many of them social, where the information gets pushed to you or filtered to you, and you're not really searching for it. You set up your filters, whether that's your friends or whatever it may be, and it comes to you. So what role does search play in that world?
Well, the model that you're describing is exactly what happens with technologies in Silicon Valley. They start off as a very simple idea, text search, and then they become pervasive and they become ubiquitous. It's still search, but it's search done in a different way. And I think that's wonderful. The fact of the matter is that in order to do the kind of searches that you're describing, you still need a very large database of information. You still need the underlying search engine, but it's initiated from a different point. It's initiated from a friends list or some autonomous thing or a location. We have a product called Google Goggles, which you take a picture of something and it actually does 16 different searches and it votes as to what it is. Is it animal, mineral? Is it a landmark? Is it a menu? And does it work with OCR? So to me, the story you're telling is a time-honored story of the Valley. And I would argue that the Valley does a lot of very disruptive things. If you take a look at Silicon Valley in general, in information technology and in green energy, these are the two of the most important things affecting our planet today. In information, what I have learned in my career is that information is something people care an enormous amount about. And so to think that what we're doing here will not be controversial is to be naive. Of course, when you're dealing with information in the forms that you described or I described, you will have critics, there will be interesting issues, and there will be lots and lots of challenges for all of us.
Okay, I think we have some questions in the back. Can you start right there? Say your name and make your question brief.
Hi, my name's A.B. Katz, and I was wondering how you plan on making search more serendipitous. Don't you need like additional information about an individual's taste graph, to borrow a term from Chris Dixon?
How will you make search more serendipitous?
Yes. So today a simple explanation for how our search ranking works is we use a set of hundreds of signals. The signals are scored and ranked. So the answer that you get in traditional text search is a reflection of that scoring. The more information that we have about you, the better the search results. So if, for example, you are logged in and we know your search history, we can give you a more targeted answer. It'll be a slightly better result. So we preserve anonymous search because we think that's important for end users, but we prefer that we know more about you, we know at least your IP address, and then that kind of information. We can do serendipity with the kinds of information. A typical example would be if we know who your friends are, or information about your other patterns, we can sort of suggest that other people like you found this interesting. The technology is generally known as collaborative filtering, and it technically works pretty well. That's a simple preview of much more complex things that we can also do. Okay.
Next question right there.
Hi, Chad Gatacha from The Next Web. First of all, that was a great speech.
Oh, thank you.
Hey, you're welcome. So my question is, Google does a lot of things, but as CEO moving forward, if you could only do one thing, focus on one thing, what would it be?
Well, the answer at Google continues to be search. And the most important thing is the transformation of traditional text search, which is syntactic in nature, to this semantic version of search that we were discussing earlier, where we understand the context and the meaning of what you're looking for. So the sum of that is really the semantic aspects, the probabilistic aspects, the deeper index, and the personal information, along with information such as your friends list.
Okay, next question.
Karen Zhou from Xerox. Google doing lots of things. I know you focus on search. I know you also help in the country tackle clean energy, healthcare, all those still very tough, issues. Can you share a little bit about, what you're doing on the healthcare side?
Healthcare? Are you doing healthcare?
We've done some analysis of how Google is used, and the internal analyses indicate that somewhere between 3 and 5% of the queries that we get are health-related. So we went, oh my God, people might actually be using this for real health, diagnosing real problems. And so we hired a set of doctors and a set of people who understand the medical area much better than we did to help us categorize and score our results. That's probably the most important thing that we've done. We are also building an infrastructure for health questions where you log in and you give us health information. That area is complicated because it's governed by both HIPAA, the healthcare regulations, as well as the need to integrate with the health IT systems, which are just torturous. You cannot imagine how painful it is to deal with 20 years worth of pre-XML-based databases and try to get all these database records together. So that's been relatively slow going, but eventually we think will produce even better health information for people, and obviously with their permission, under appropriate HIPAA guidance and appropriate security.
Next question right there.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is François. I'm the CEO of MyRP.com. I would like to know what will trigger 500 million small businesses to totally move into the cloud with Google?
Well, that's a very kind question because we have a product to offer you.
Thank you.
The way to set the question up is to say, 20 years ago when you were setting up a small business, you had to go and buy a personal computer or a small server. I was in that business of selling them at the time. And you had to have an IT professional and you had to run it in-house. The right thing for a small business to do now is to not have any computers except the things which are on people's desktops and on their smartphones and things like that, and do everything in the cloud. So the components would be an email system, a calendar system, a Salesforce automation system, and then the stuff that's vertical for whatever their business is. Google is one of the companies that offers products that we decided to price it low, $50 a year per user. We have infinite demand for that at that price, so we know that's a good price. And what we're doing is we're signing them up, literally millions of small businesses at a time. What will it take to get 500 million, I think, is additional features, additional language support, additional integration with existing database systems that people have, because people do have existing systems, they're not pure plays. And my guess is that an obvious thing to do would be to have a cloud-based workflow system that worked pretty generically. So if I could ask for one thing, I think the calendar, Gmail, the word processing, that stuff is pretty well under control. Turns out all the vendors, including Google, are now offering things there. The next thing to do is to do cloud-based workflow to actually integrate the business processes of the business, and I think you're done. That's all you got. That's all you need.
When does mobile search become material for Google? I know it's growing very fast, but what percentage of total searches are mobile today? When does it become material?
Since you asked you used the word material, I have to give you the financially correct answer, which is not now and not soon. simply because the revenue from mobile is still dwarfed by the other sources of revenue, and we wouldn't give a prediction of how. It is growing much faster than web stuff. It's still not quite at the same level of monetization for various reasons, which we're working on. So I think the best answer I can give you is eventually we think mobile will be the majority of the searches and majority of the revenue, but it's a long time.
But is it less than 1% now, less than 5%?
Again, I can't give you a specific number.
What about Google Me? When is that going to launch?
Google Me is a rumored product which I won't comment on. Go ahead.
Hi there, this is Devin Coldaway from TechCrunch, and I think that most people have a pretty good idea of what Google is talking about when they say don't be evil, but I think that when you say that you want to be open, that's just as subtle of a concept and something that's just as difficult to pin down. So I was wondering if you could help us understand what Google really means when you say that you want to be open.
Well, it's easier to understand it by opposition. So the easiest comparison to do today with a broad audience is to talk about the Apple model and the web model. The Apple model, which works extremely well, speaking as a proud former board member, you have to use their development tools, their platform, their hardware, their software. If you submit an application, they have to approve it. They have to use their monetization and their distribution. That would not be open, right? So the inverse would be open. So that's the simple answer.
So not Apple.
So that would be an answer.
Fair enough.
Yeah. So in our case, for example, we had fun. Flash was allegedly a problem, so we love Flash. We want Flash. We demonstrated Flash doing extremely well on Android. That's an example of openness. Let the user decide. The user can decide whether HTML5 or Flash will ultimately dominate. Our own opinion is probably both will do pretty well for a while. Let the user decide. That's what openness is.
Yet you have some carriers that when you have an Android phone, they put some apps on the phone that are hard to remove.
Well, the good news about the carriers is that they can add, but they don't delete.
Mm-hmm.
So again, openness is adding choices. And if you don't like those apps, you could buy a vendor that does not have those apps on it. Okay. And with the level of competition in Android, we suspect that if you feel that you and the majority of people here feel very strongly about those apps that you don't like, those vendors will get a very clear message that those apps need to be deleted. That's how markets work.
Right. Next question. We have about time for one or two more.
Kate Metz with the Register. There are antitrust investigations of Google underway in Texas and in the EU, and part of the complaint is that Google's universal search allows the company to kind of push their own services, such as Google Product Search, such as Google Maps, at the expense of competitors. Do you see it that way, and does universal search use different algorithms, separate algorithms from primary search?
We don't see it that way, and indeed it appears to us that those investigations, that's your term, not mine, are stimulated by competitors who have a very, very clear vested interest in the outcome. Our answer on universal search, which we spent a lot of time on, is that we have chosen the vendor of information that produces the best end user outcome. And sometimes that's a Google source, sometimes it's not a Google source. And it's not okay to say you shouldn't use any Google sources, and it's also not okay to say that you should only use Google sources. We in fact use a mixture, and we believe and we think that if there are in fact investigations, their investigations will show that that's in fact how we operate.
Thank you.
How has Google Instant affected your query volume? And how do you measure query volume now?
That's a very good technical question. The simplest answer is at the end of the day, it's pretty much neutral to positive. There's a lot of dynamics that change. You know, remember, it's faster. So you actually, on the margin, you're done faster, but you also get more queries. But at the end of the day, it's neutral to positive.
So when I type in a search and I get literally 5 or 10 different results, that doesn't count as 5 or 10 different queries as I keep typing, or it counts as the one final query?
Again, in the measurement system that we use, right, it works out that we get the same behavioral, same eventual pages that people go to, and so forth and so on. It does happen more quickly, which is good. So neutral to positive.
Right. Question right there.
Hi. Maurice Wright, pay 4 tweet, pay number 4 tweet. Google has a pretty dominant position as an advertiser. I'm wondering, what's your opinion on Twitter as an advertising platform, and does Google plan on buying them at some point?
Well, I can't answer the latter, because I can't talk about any M&A activity. Twitter strikes me as being a very, very important platform in general, simply because of the scale that they operate at. If you look at the reach they have, and so Twitter should, and again, these are people we know well, and we have a partnership with them on showing some search results. Twitter should be able to come up with advertising and monetization products, at least in our opinion, that are highly lucrative. So we think that they're going to do very, very well.
So let me take a question from Twitter, which is, are you worried about talent leaving Google and creating innovation outside of Google that maybe Google should have captured? Foursquare is the primary example, but there's endless examples of Google alums starting companies and some of them launching on stage. As you get to the size that you are, you can't capture all the innovation. But how do you handle that?
I would say it's one of many worries that when you have a large company. Executive career development, dealing with a large organization, decision making, and so forth and so on. It's not a huge crisis, if put it that way, but it's an important sort of criticism of the company. From our perspective, we do what we can. Foursquare is a good example where these were two people who were very, very clever, who were at Google too early, if you will. And when the opportunity to do Foursquare, which is hugely successful, came along, it was just better for them to do it outside. They'd already left Google, and we wish them the best of luck. Obviously, we would prefer those things to occur within Google, but the fact of the matter is that part of the robustness of the market is that there have to be multiple successful companies, IPOs, wealth creation opportunities. It's how the system works.
How often do you take a 20% project that was too early and revive it when it's time for it?
It's done bottoms up, not tops down, so there's no way to estimate that. But usually, every one of our engineers is encouraged to do a 20% project, and they believe in them, so they come out. Or if they leave the company, they do it as a startup. So we understand that if their passion is there, we need to face, do we want to do this? Do we care about it? Is important.
Okay, one final question right there.
Yeah, I'm Chintu Parikh, CEO and co-founder of Sachmania, makers of award-winning Yapper, your app maker
your question,
platform.
Please.
So we would like to tightly integrate with Android Marketplace API. And are you going to open that up anytime soon?
So the Android Marketplace API?
Yeah, so we can even make the app development much faster. Right now it takes half an hour. It can go live in half an hour to the Android Marketplace.
And so you want it to be less than a half an hour?
Less than. Right now we have to submit the binary to the Android Marketplace. And then, that's a manual process. Instead of that, we would like to automate the whole thing.
That sounds like a great proposal. Let me work on it. I'm sure the answer will be yes.
Do you think that one hot topic, obviously, right now is these places databases that you're creating and everyone's creating? And there seems to be a lot of replication that a lot of different businesses, from AOL to Google to startups, are basically creating their own places database. Do you think that would you support an open places database?
Well, first place, I think we would argue that you can use our databases as open APIs already.
Okay.
I thought the question you were going to ask had to do with the copyright questions. So the problem with the places databases is that there are very, very serious issues of copyright and ownership of that information, and we're working through all of those. But usually what happens is these databases, there end up being a couple, and usually the one that's most successful is open. So the simple rule and the Google rule is we're going to do open things, make these things exposed, make them accessible.
Terrific. Well, please give
Thank you
a
all.
round of applause.
Take care.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.